Hi, everybody. This is Jeremy Siskin, the author of the Jazz Piano Fundamentals series and playing solo jazz piano. And I've got a very special guest today. I'm here with Adam Birnbaum, who I've known for like 15 years now. I first met Adam because he was the winner of the American Pianist Association Cole Porter Fellowship. And I was a finalist in that competition afterward, so we kind of ended up meeting. But he's gone on to just do so many incredible things. I remember seeing him play with the great drummer Al Foster. He's a member of the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, Darcy James Argues, Secret Society, Cecile McLaurin Salvant's band. He's a professor at SUNY Purchase, and he has a new album out, which I've really enjoyed, called Preludes. So, welcome, Adam. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this album, Preludes? Because it's a pretty unique album.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy. Yeah, so the idea with this record is my love for Bach and my love for improvisation and jazz, and trying to tie them together. And in a sense, going back to what Bach uh, did himself, because we know that Baroque musicians were improvisers, and we know that Bach was an incredible improviser. We don't have recordings of what that sounded like, but I think in the classical world, we've gotten into a bit of a rut, if you ask me, with kind of playing his pieces verbatim, not just Bach, but just generally speaking, playing classical repertoire without remembering that it was all improvised originally in the first place. So I kind of reimagined some of the very famous preludes from the Well-Tempered Clavier that everyone has played as a kid, that a lot of people are super familiar with, and kind of treated them as standards and reimagined them in different ways. A lot of them are metric arrangements where I changed the meter from 8 to 7 or from 12 to 11, things like that. Um, Tried to preserve the essential sound of the pieces, so harmonically I didn't change too much. It's a lot of the original chords that Bach wrote, and he actually wrote really great chord changes, it turns out, so you don't really need to do much to them to play with these pieces. Um, and I put together a group to kind of feature this music. Keita Ogawa on percussion, who's a really kind of magical, uh, not a traditional drummer, but someone who just adds a whole different color and dynamic to the music, more of like a chamber music quality. And Matt Closey on bass, who's a longtime partner of mine, who's sort of just a rock solid musician and can play in almost any style with equal, uh, expertise. So that's the idea behind the album.
Yeah, I have to say, I enjoyed it on like multiple levels because I actually didn't hear the connections so obviously the first time I listened through it. And then each time I kind of said, oh, that really sounds like that chord progression. Oh, I recognize that prelude. And I haven't played all of these, but as a piano student, you end up playing 4 or 5 or 6 of these. And with each listen, I started hearing more of the relationships. And it was
Cool.
kind of just really rewarding. And I plan to go back and maybe look at some of these preludes and see how they were transitioned. Um,
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah, and why preludes and not fugues or inventions or suites?
Well,
Was there something in particular that grabbed you?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the fugues, that's easy. Those are so intricate and so
Right.
masterfully written. I don't feel that I could improvise anything better than what they are already. So with that, I chose not to touch them at all for, lack of any idea how to make them any better. But preludes, to me, a lot of these pieces, and I chose the ones that sound the most like this, are sort of like improvisations that were put to paper, like the C major. It's just an idea, right? It's an arpeggio. It's really nothing in itself, but he takes that arpeggio and he just kind of moves it around. What if I move this note here? I can do this, and I can do this. He takes that, and I imagine that he kind of improvised these originally, just saying, all right, what if I take this little figuration and play around with it? I could do this, I could do this. Um, and so to me, they are kind of invitations to improvise further on them, and the way that they're written, they're kind of open ended. So I avoided the ones that there's some preludes that have like pretty dense, really amazing contrapuntal writing and more specific stuff. I tried to avoid those and pick the simplest ones that leave the most space for you to kind of reimagine them.
I'm also curious, are there albums in this kind of genre of reinterpreting classical music that you really love? I mean, obviously, Brad put out After Bach, for instance, and everybody loves Brad.
Sure.
But are
I'm
there ones that you've been attracted to?
I mean, of course, Bach has fascinated jazz musicians for a long time for a lot of the reasons I mentioned. I think there's something really universal about it. You know, uh, I think mine is quite a bit different from some of the recent ones. Brad Meldau's After Bach is a brilliant album, but he sort of uses Bach as a launching point to do something pretty radically different that's sort
Hmm.
of inspired by Bach, but using a lot of modern harmony and just kind of taking it, transforming it into something very different. Mine is a little more of a direct and maybe basic approach because that's just who I am as a musician. So I just took the pieces as they are and kind of said, all right, let's treat this more like a standard and just kind of play around with it. Um, Dan Tepfer also has some really interesting Bach interpretations he's put out. Again, probably more along the lines of what Brad has done, sort of playing the Bach. It's like an A B. Here's the Bach, and then here's my
Hmm.
extrapolation that's sort of tangentially related to that, but it doesn't sound like that. It sounds much more modern. So I tried to kind of bridge the gap, I guess, a little bit and create jazz pieces that are the Bach preludes themselves.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, with all that in mind, you're going to show me some stuff that you like to do to think about and practice contrapuntal improvisation. So I'm very curious what you brought today.
Sure, yeah. So I'll have to start with a disclaimer that a lot of this stuff I kind of stole or lifted from Fred Hirsch, who is a teacher of mine. I know
Who's
you studied
the
with Fred
master?
as well. And yeah, no shame in that. He's taught a lot of the current generation of jazz pianists how to think about improvisation and how to find your own voice.
Mm,
And the cool thing about these exercises is they're not, hey, play this lick and you'll sound like this exercises, but they're very conceptual. So they teach you how to kind of think and use your imagination and hear sounds that you're hearing in your head that might be different from what someone else doing the very same exercise would come up with.
mm,
And that's what I really like about them. So the idea of this exercise is kind of just to start with the most basic type of counterpoint and think about, say we have to take a tune to start with because this works best if we take a standard. So I'm going to take All the Things You Are. So just to get it in our ears, this is the song as it originally sounds, right? Right, etc. I'm sure most of you know it. I won't play the whole thing. So to start with, you need a frame of reference that I'm going to improvise over. So that chord structure and that song is going to be my frame of reference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two voices, and each measure, or every 4 beats in the song the way it's originally written, I'm going to move those two voices to the next chord. In this piece, it works pretty well because you have a change of harmony basically every measure. Even if there wasn't a change of harmony, the idea is you keep moving those voices every measure in a consistent way so that there's a sort of constant motion to the whole exercise. And
mm,
what you want to do is you think of the song, you keep the song in mind, but you're not really thinking, let me play the third here, let me play the seventh here. You're trying to just follow the sound of the two melodies. And that takes you away from sort of thinking vertically from chord, here's another chord, and brings you to this world of how can I get these two melodies to connect like the other way, to create long lines horizontally that move across the chord changes. So I'll give an example. And this is very similar to what we would call, if you're into counterpoint, like traditional counterpoint, this would be first species where you have whole note against whole note. Very
mhm,
basic and kind of the hardest one to do in a way because you have so many limitations, right? So when you have to commit to one note, it really has to be the right note, right? Or you're stuck with it for 4 beats.
mhm,
So
mhm.
it takes a lot of concentration. So let's say I start here. So maybe I'll stop there for now. So that was the first two A's up to the first chord of the bridge, right?
Yeah,
Um,
beautiful. Are you keeping any rules in mind, or are you really following your ear? Are
I'm
you trying
following my
to avoid dissonances or resolve things in any particular way, or it's just kind of like I'm gonna make those two voices sound as good as I possibly can?
Yeah, basically I mean, I'm trying to turn off as much as I can the thinking part of my brain that says like,
Mm.
oh, I have this chord, I should put this chord tone on it, or, oh, I played this interval, I should do this here. Um, there's basic rules for sure, but the difference between studied counterpoint, like species counterpoint, and this is that when you write something down, then it's very easy to sort of like focus on
Mm.
what you should or shouldn't do. But when you're doing it spontaneously, you kind of have to develop more of an intuitive sense of the same things, right? So let's say parallel motion in general is not very good. So if I went, right, that's pretty, but having the same interval over and over again gets boring, right? Sixths, thirds, tenths, they sound nice. But it's not really counterpoint. Counterpoint is always having contrary motion, having different voices do different things against each other. So that would be an example of poor counterpoint. And like if you study species counterpoint, that's an actual rule, right? You're not allowed to have more than 3 of the same interval in a row for that reason. So you can kind of look at it both ways, like which is like a chicken and egg. Did the rule come first, or is it just a way to sort of force you to do something that's naturally musical in the first place, which is
Right,
to
right, right.
avoid overdoing one thing. Um, so I don't know if you want to try it yourself or if I should
Yeah,
kind of keep
let me try
going.
these first 16 measures.
Sure.
Um, so oh man, I got really stuck at the end there. Wow, that was not great. Okay,
No,
I'll try it one
actually,
more time. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
actually really liked it. I thought it was really nice. I mean, but sure, if
I
you
felt
want to
like
do
I
it
was just
again,
kind
go
of
for it.
leaping around trying to find like contrary consonant intervals instead of actually playing good melodies in both of those parts.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can try that helps is you can make one more limitation, which is the top voice can only move in half or whole steps. That can
Mm,
kind of force you to just follow the contour of that one, and then you can fit the bottom voice around that. Sometimes I
right.
find that makes it a little easier.
And I know sometimes when I do this kind of thing with students, their first thing that they do is they make the left hand a bass line, which we do not want to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's the opposite of that. You want to really focus on having two independent melodies and not gravitating towards the same part of the chord, and definitely not the root.
All right. At the risk of embarrassing myself, let me try this again, and I'm gonna try to move the top voice only by step. So
Great. Yeah. Nice. I like especially the way it ended there. You kind of found a nice like
uh
way into that
yeah.
last G major, right? And even in the middle, you played something very dissonant in the middle, right? But the cool thing about this is like, in a sense, there's no such thing as a mistake, right? Because the most dissonant interval you could come up with could still resolve in the next measure and be really satisfying melodically if you find the right way to move it forward.
Right.
So
And
part of
one of
this
the things I find my
exercise,
oh go ahead.
oh,
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
yeah. I was just going to say part of the exercise is not panicking when you play something you don't like, which is a good discipline for all improvisers, right? It's like, okay, that happened. I can't change it. So rather than getting upset or saying, that was the wrong thing, you just kind of very zen like, you try to just listen and follow the voices to the next thing. And it might end up sounding great.
Right. And this makes me think about as well another Fred concept, which is playing the short harmony versus the long harmony. Right.
Mm,
Like this
yeah.
teaches you to kind of aim somewhere, or maybe you're not even aiming, maybe you're just resolving somewhere. And maybe you're passing by and not playing the exact right notes. I think I remember when you first did it, you played maybe the major seventh on the E flat seven because it was leading to somewhere on the A flat major. And so it's like you're playing the long harmony instead of thinking about like, okay, I must play Mixolydian for E flat seven, I must play Ionian for A flat major. It like kind of allows you to have a more global view of the harmony, if that makes sense. Do you think?
Yeah,
Am I onto
absolutely.
something? Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's definitely what I love about this exercise. It's sort of the antidote to that way of thinking, which
Mm,
is sometimes helpful. We all teach. And sometimes you do need to want to think about this chord, what notes fit with this chord. It's helpful to think that way sometimes, right? But it's also kind of a dead end to only think that way and to not learn how to sort of think beyond that to like, how do I connect across the chords and possibly even notes that are not technically in the scale or in the chord end up sounding beautiful, if you follow them melodically through.
Right. Okay, so let's say I set my timer for 20 minutes. I did this for 20 minutes. I'm kind of ready for a next step. What might a logical next step or two be?
Yeah, so this is kind of where it diverges into so many different directions
Yeah.
because you could go so many ways from this, right? So we could add a third voice and we could stick with first species. And I'll just show a quick example of that. So now we're still limited to the same note choice as one note per measure, but say now I'm going to start with three notes. So much more challenging to follow the sound of three notes than two, right? But it opens up a lot of possibilities. So let's say I go. I
Fun.
didn't want. I wasn't ready to stop because I hadn't quite resolved that last one.
Yeah,
But you
yeah,
get the
exactly.
idea, right? So much harder, but you can get some really interesting sounds with three voices, and I think it's really cool to explore how much power you can have from just three voices that are really thoughtfully crafted, as
Yeah,
opposed
and
to
you
like,
usually put two in the right, one in the left, or do you try to sometimes put two in the left, one in the right? Like, how do you manage that third voice with two hands?
yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, for me, it's much easier to do two in the right, but
Yeah.
it's awesome practice to try to do it both ways for sure, to
Okay.
mix and match. So you get into all the possibilities of different rhythms, left versus right, and then I think eventually you kind of leave these restrictive things and you can kind of just say, all right, well, what if I let these voices move more freely? Right? So you can
Yeah, beautiful.
ev- eventually kind of branch out to just it starts with just hearing two voices, but then now I'm bringing jazz phrasing back into it, right? Which is kind of where it becomes more fun because now I can actually swing and I can play with jazz language. But it starts with just being able to hear the voices against each other on their own, sort of even divorced from rhythm or phrasing. And then when you bring that back in, then you can really kind of have fun with it.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. So, again, for everybody, the album is Preludes, um, available anywhere you get CDs. And where else should people go to check you out?
Well, I have the usual social media stuff. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I have a YouTube channel if you're interested following there. I have a website. I don't know if anyone still goes to actual websites, but I try to keep my performances on there as well. So,
And
yeah,
pretty
those
much
are the
every
best
Monday
places.
night at the Vanguard?
Pretty much, yeah,
Pretty much
exactly.
every
I
Monday
mean,
night.
yeah, I mean, we're missing this coming Monday because we'll be in Portugal, but normally every Monday.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging and showing that to me. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and congrats again on the album. It's really beautiful.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Adam.
All right.